And the first item of discussion is the Board of Education budget for this upcoming fiscal year. Mr. Maniscalco, do you want to begin with the ECS funding?
Sure. Mr. Roberts, is Mrs. Perry on the call as well? Patty Perry?
She is, sir. Do you want her brought in?
Yeah, it'd probably be good to have her brought in as well.
Okay.
And Mr. Maniscalco, if you don't mind. Ms. Perry, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Thank you for joining us. If you don't mind, Mr. Maniscalco, I know that all of us have received some information about ECS funding and potential cuts, but the question I have is the correct school funding, and maybe Ms. Perry can enlighten us. What does in terms of us making a contribution, what's our part of that funding?
Yeah, so I think all we can really do is base our part of that funding off of this last year's experience, which I know Mrs. Perry just recently got. So do you want to explain to them what the experience was that what we have to pay for this year?
Sure. So we're estimating right now the payment to the magnet school is going to be approximately $493,000. So we will not receive that funding. It goes directly to the magnet school.
And is this a change, Ms. Perry, from last year? I thought we were around 400,000.
It's a little bit of a decrease from last year.
It's a decrease. Okay. All right. Thank you. So yes, Councilor Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But Mike, do you have any more comment or Patty on that? And then I can ask a question if you are done,
Well,
unless you're done.
Just to kind of go over the whole situation, this last year when the governor came out with his budget, and every year I've done a budget in the state of Connecticut, which is, I think, 9 years, almost 10 years. I've based my revenue numbers from the state off of the governor's budget. And this year when the governor's budget came out, he said he was specifically holding municipalities harmless. He was going to flat fund municipalities for all their municipal funding. And his proposal was to use some of the funds that were being received from the federal government to offset any proposed decreases. From what I've been able to put together is what happened after that is it went to the Appropriations Committee, and the Appropriations Committee said, well, we have this 2017 agreement that is to reduce ECS funds for certain places and increase it for other places. I believe the intent of what they're trying to do is try to be a little bit more equitable for education as a result of certain lawsuits that occurred. As a result, the town of South Windsor lost funds last year to ECS. It's proposed in that funding formula that we lose about approximately 270 some odd thousand this year, and we're going to lose again next year another 270 some odd thousand. I think the real concerning portion of this whole scenario, when looking at who's getting money and who's not, the town of South Windsor is losing $270,000, but yet Greenwich is getting more. The town of South Windsor is losing $270,000, but Fairfield is getting more. And Darien is getting more. And a number of communities that have higher median household incomes, that have more affluent communities and have more opportunities, are getting more money than the town of South Windsor. To me, it feels a little bit like a reverse Robin Hood scenario where they're stealing from the poor and giving to the rich. And especially in a climate where the town of South Windsor is seeing unprecedented student population growth and impacts to our community as a result of that, I would think the state would want to step up and actually provide support for the great work that's being done in our community and support to the residents of our community. But in fact, they're taking our money and sending it to more affluent communities. I think it's disappointing. I think it's not looking forward to the future of what's happening. And while I understand that agreements are put together in 2017, today is 2021. And I think they've missed a lot that's happened, and a lot has changed between 2017 and 2021. And I think a lot of things need to be addressed and looked at and taken into account. So that's kind of the scenario that we're looking at. We are going to have to make some adjustments if the plan is to continue with the 0% tax rate or increase or decrease. If we want to stay at a 0, we're going to have to make some changes either to revenue, or we're going to have to make some cuts to expenditures. Those cuts will either have to come from general government or from the increase to the Board of Education. Just as an aside, I would tell you that, the general government total increase is 440,000. So I think if we're going to be doing some type of decrease to the general government budget, we are going to have to talk about some type of layoff or reduction in service. But that's outside the education side, so sorry.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Maniscalco. And Councilor Snyder, you want to follow up with that question now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Mike, as Patty noted, the $493, that has already been taken out of the ECS funding.
So what
So we
happens?
don't have to,
Yeah, so
Go
what
ahead.
happens is, no, that's okay. So I believe, and Patty, correct me if I'm wrong, we get 4 quarterly payments of ECS money. The last quarterly payment is typically shorted a certain amount that is then sent to the magnet schools instead of us.
okay, so based on the fact that they've cut our ECS by 270,000 unfairly, if I might share my opinion, this council's opinion, we don't have to take any other funding out of anywhere to pay that correct because it's already taken care of.
Yeah, it's taken out from the state.
Yeah, we don't even get,
Before it
yeah,
gets
we're
to
not
us.
even getting. So how does that impact, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. How does that impact our budget as far as your revenue estimates from ECS?
So our revenue
So will
estimate in the proposed budget, is that what you're?
Yes.
Well, it puts us upside down. So we
Like
don't have-
270,000, that's it? Or did we think that we needed to take money out of somewhere else to pay the crack?
No, we knew that money was coming out off the top. So
Okay,
the numbers so what happens is it's a little bit of a game. The state gives us a number and they say, this is the amount we're allocating to the town of South Windsor for ECS funds. But that number, we don't actually receive that whole number because the state then takes that money out for the magnet schools. So
okay,
we
so
never actually,
ECS, just,
yeah, we
right.
never actually
So
get the full amount.
ECS is, for the public, ECS is the education cost sharing grant that the state gives to all 169 towns using some kind of formula that
Some
apparently
mysterious
I don't
formula.
agree with. Yeah, that I don't agree with. Have we spoken to our representatives and our senators to see if there's anything we can do to help offset this from the Appropriations Committee?
I have tried to have some conversations with a few of them, and I don't know how productive or not productive they will be, but hopefully we will see some type of action. Because in all honesty, almost $500,000 in 2 years is quite a bit to lose in revenue.
Okay, so my next question is, have you spoken to the superintendent about this at all?
Yeah, we spoke last week very briefly. As we just said, we were waiting for the numbers of what's actually coming out for the correct magnet school to figure out what that number actually is going to be. That's a little bit higher than what we were expecting it to be. So that's not a good thing, unfortunately.
Right.
And, additionally, this is only out of the Appropriations Committee, so it hasn't gone through the full legislature yet. So we have to see how the full session goes with everything. So hopefully, maybe there's a chance that they could change some things, but we'll see.
Okay. All right, so we're really we know the bad news, but we really need to be in a holding pattern until the legislature votes on it. Now, our budget gets passed sometime in middle May. I think by May 22nd, we're required by charter.
Correct.
But when are you expecting them to vote on this? I mean,
I don't remember. Do you remember when Senator Anwar said they were in session to vote? I don't remember if he said exactly the other
Till
day.
June 5th.
It was June 5th.
Yeah, I think they're in session till June 5th. Which
So
doesn't
it'll
help
probably
us
get
if we
passed
have
on
to
June
pass
5th.
it.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, if I were to provide you with any recommendation, I would suggest that we probably should prepare for the worst.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that's the
And
that's the
any,
What is it?
smartest
And,
financial move.
so is there anything, let me ask this. If we plan on having some surplus funds, I use the word surplus funds, but I don't want to use that word. I want to use unexpended funds at the end of the year based on, whatever, less of a snow year, not so much overtime, whatever the case may be. Is it possible for us to reduce non-reoccurring costs in our current budget and to be able to cover that with any possible unexpended funds? Since the timing, we really won't know until the end of their session, how they voted. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Or do people have questions?
Yes, Councilor Snyder, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the timing is really bad for us because they're not required to get their budget done till June 5th, and yet we're supposed to have ours done by May 22nd. So that the timing is really working against us
That's our
here.
charter.
I got you. Yes.
So if we utilize funds for non-recurring costs, okay, and I'm just going to throw this out there, like if we have to reduce, this council is really not interested in laying people off. I really don't think, I don't really have an appetite for that.
Mhm.
We can always look at our services and things that we can pull back on, and hopefully maybe we can work with the board about possibly sharing some of that decrease. But a way to get it to be able to help us to function would be to pull that money out of a non-reoccurring expenditure and replace it with what we may have in a surplus. And I know that's not the way to do business. Believe me, I get it. Patty's probably sitting there going, "What is she saying?"
Patty and I are both cringing.
I think it's.
All right.
I know, and
Thank you.
Patty should, because that's just, what I'm saying is crazy. But I mean, it's $270,000. It's over $250,000, and I don't know how else we would do it.
Right.
Thank you, Mr.
All right.
Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Snyder. Councilor Hockenberry.
Thank you, Mayor. I I agree with everything that Jan said. We don't want layoffs. We want to go over everything, and we've been going over everything through, the last couple months through the budgets. And I know we haven't finished or haven't gotten back like, we're going to do this. This is a plus. This is a minus. This is a minus. So we kind of need to have that line item down so that we're prepared on those decisions that we thought of, and then see where we land. I'd like, and maybe, I don't know, a suggestion is to have the superintendent come in maybe for our next meeting and have a discussion with us all before we even vote on, because don't we have to, we're voting on, aren't we voting on that part of the budget for soon? Actually, I think the 15th. Hopefully that before then we can have a meeting with her to maybe discuss what we can, maybe have some questions for her. But the other thing is we're not the only municipality that is going to have to wait or hold back on making decisions. All 169 of us are going through the same thing, except for those affluent communities. And I don't want to take away it, and then something comes, because it's not passed through appropriations right now. It's still being worked on. I hope that we can get answers from our legislators soon on how they're going to push forward to help us out. Because we really have to push forward with how the enrollment has affected our school system. I mean, I would hate to do layoffs either Board of Ed or here. You know, our services are, you know, I think we do a good job as it is, but hopefully maybe we can have a meeting with the superintendent. Just a suggestion.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Hockenberry. Councilor Manili. Can't hear you, Councilor Manili.
I'm new. What can I tell you?
Okay.
I don't think we have an option to wait. Is that true, Mr. Maniscalco? We have to pass a budget and we have to give the Board of Education their budget by May 15th. And ours, like, you know, less than a week later.
Yeah, it's required in your charter to give them their budget or pass their budget, I believe, on the 15th, and then ours on the 22nd.
Right. And so we can't, we're not afforded the grace period of June 5th if by then, in talking to like some of the state representatives, and they were saying that if it doesn't pass by June 5th, then they will work through the summer until they do come up with a budget, and that's happened before. So we can't wait until, you know, we have a conversation, and we can't wait until we have a final number from the state. We have to do something now. So we almost have to act as if we're not getting any of that money and just move forward. And then if we do get the money, somehow, then we can put it back, and we can put back some back, put some back into the programs or anything. And I think the Board of Education, I think you had mentioned laying off. Now I know the Board of Education, they have by their contracts that they may have had to send out letters of like non-renewal maybe, but now do our town employees have like a deadline? Like teachers, we were notified like April 1st if we're like on the hook for maybe not being renewed because of budgets. Is there anything like that on the town side?
No, ours is a little different because we don't have the same requirements for the school year per se.
Okay.
It's slightly different for us.
So I'm not in favor of laying anybody off, and especially like with like such really short notice, you know, like to you know, come into it and say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have the money, so we need to lay you off. I don't think that's going to sit well with a lot of people. So I think we have to, you know, go back. We have, you know, about 25 days to get this all figured out. Well, you have 25 days to get it figured out, present to us, and then we say yes or no. But I don't think we can wait till June 5th. I don't think that's allowed. So we have to, you know, start cutting right now. And so that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Neely. I will just remind everyone, we have a special meeting scheduled if needed on May 10th. So our May 3rd regular council meeting could be this discussion and finalize things. And then on the 10th, we could make the decision and still meet our May 15th deadline. So just throwing that out there so we see the timeline. All right. All right, Councilor Evans.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if we could just go a little backwards in the budgeting process, and based on that 2017 formula and what the state projects, how do we decide what we're going to budget? I'm just curious, like, how do we determine that number on our end?
Yeah, so what I've always done is I've used the number that's released from the governor in the governor's budget, because that timing of that budget being released typically fits with what's going on in the town, you know, in the town. We typically budget a bit under what he releases to account for, you know, if there's going to be something, but not to the degree that the Appropriations Committee did.
Is it typically like this, that we're, I don't know if we're this off or so off, or how has that historically happened with what we've kind of budgeted versus what we've been given from the state?
That I'm not 100% clear how it had been historically. I know last year was slightly less because last year was the beginning of this whole 2017 magic formula that they came up with.
And then I'm also just wondering if the American Rescue Plan Act, the funding that we're getting through that, would there be any opportunity to take something that we had planned to do from our current budget for around, let's say, $270,000 or $400,000 and do it using that funding to offset what we might need in our budget for next year?
So one of the very clear rules that came out about that was you can't use those funds to decrease taxes, whether it's directly or indirectly. So I mean, that's been explicit through the entire process. We don't know a whole lot much else on how we can and can't use those funds, but that's been explicitly stated that they cannot be used to offset taxes directly or indirectly.
I was hoping we could like do the pickleball court on a, you know,
Yeah.
the rescue plan or something. It's just kind of move it ahead and change where we're funding it from. But okay, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Evans. I would just add that since you mentioned the pickleball court, I mean, I think the biggest area that we have some flexibility with is capital projects. There are some large projects in there that may have to be put off for a year, and that would still maintain services in all our other departments. So keep that in mind as a place that we may have to go. All right, Councilor Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As part of a suggestion, from what I've read so far, and I still have a lot more to read and understand about the American Recoveries Act, is the money that's coming in from the federal government to all the municipalities around probably the country. But I think we're getting what, a couple of $1 million, Mike?
Yeah, so the state allocation or the town allocation was about $2 to $3 million, something like that. But then on top of that, we also get a county allocation that's coming to us as well, because the way they allocated it to other states, they allocated a certain dollar amount to county governments and then a certain dollar amount to local governments. Since the state of Connecticut doesn't have a county government, they've divided the county government money up amongst the municipalities. I believe it's on some type of a per capita basis. So we're actually up around $7 million now.
Okay, so from what I understand, those funds can be used for IT, sewer use, water, I guess, treatments and sewer treatment, things
Correct.
like that. And there's several things. So I'm wondering if in the capital projects budget, which is non-reoccurring, for its GIS and some of the other things that I know Scott has in there, is it possible to take the funding out of capital, take those projects that fit that criteria out of capital projects? I know GIS is ongoing, but I know Scott has it. Mr. Roberts has continuing things going in there about the fiber optics and things like that. So I got to think that somewhere in those capital projects, we have 17 of them this year, or even in the water pollution control budget, in waste management, things like that, that could be that it's so important that they're non-reoccurring. So for instance, if Mr. Roberts needs $300,000 to finish up the looping on all the fiber optics he's been working on for several years, many years actually, couldn't we take that, is it possible, and I'm just saying, is it possible to take those project money, take that project out of capital projects and do it with this money that we have coming in, and then we can reduce the capital projects enough to be able to cover this? But we're not reducing capital, we're just simply taking some of those projects out of capital projects because they're non-reoccurring and utilizing that funding that we have coming in for some of those. So those would not be going to reduce taxes. They're actually going to projects that fit the criteria that the feds have handed down to us. So that's just a suggestion. Many years of dealing with feds and restrictions. So there's certain things that, if we identify these programs that we know fit in that category, in those that fit that criteria, let's take them out of capital projects and let's do them, and they finally get done, and and then moving forward, we can add more projects on if we need to. Actually, if we take that money out of projects that fit the criteria from capital projects we have now for next year, we may be able to move some other capital projects up. So I think there's a lot, and it's not reducing taxes. It's all it's doing is taking care of those projects that meet that criteria. And I gotta think, Mike, that we have projects that fit that criteria. So, just Jan
I know.
Snyder's 41 years of state government thought.
Yeah, I
Thank
know
you.
Mr.
Thank
Perry
you.
sat through a couple trainings on some of this stuff so far, although I think the information's been fairly vague. I don't know if you've had any chance to think about any of that. Not to put you on the spot, Patty, but
No, that's okay. I mean, the training has been pretty vague. We're hearing that around May 11th will be more guidance. But right now, all we do know is that it can go for water, sewer, and broadband technology infrastructure. So I do think that some of the capital projects proposed in this year and future years could meet some of that criteria.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Ms. Perry. Thank you, Councilor Snyder. Councilor Evans, was that a hand up?
So to say it's kind of in lines with what I was thinking, but perhaps Councilor Snyder's knowledge of government is more accurately portrayed as a way that it is possible to make it happen. I'm curious if it doesn't sound like items, let's say, in the Park and Rec master plan might fit within that American Rescue. No, okay.
I doubt it, yeah.
Perhaps we tackle something else on that plan and hold off on the pickleball court, thus cutting it. But if that's not within that realm, then as Councilor Snyder suggested, perhaps that's kind of where we look. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilor Evans. Yeah, I think I heard what Ms. Perry said was that broadband project, we've got a big project in capital projects, the sewers, there's a bridge over the Podunk River on Pleasant Valley Road. I mean, those things all seem like they may fit into those categories. So let's at least look into that. Yeah, thank you. Deputy Mayor Pendleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Maniscalco, could you have a conversation or have Dr. Carter also join us for the meeting on May 3rd, but have a conversation with Dr. Carter concerning what can be paid out of the 1.3 million for the education. I believe that's what they're getting is 1.3. I do know that they had mentioned about the computers, that they were talking about paying for the computers because that's IT stuff. So they were talking about maybe possibly using the federal money to pay for that, and that would reduce it from their budget. Maybe you can have a conversation with Dr. Carter this week to find out if there's any way that she can pull some of that out of her budget and use the federal monies for that.
we certainly can ask her. Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to come up with ideas on the government side of things, but if the board can also join and maybe they can reduce some of their budget, that would be helpful.
I think, in all honesty, to follow Councilor Hockenberry's idea, I think the best thing to do, rather than play the telephone game and go back and forth between all of us, would be to have, whether it's the superintendent or chair of the board or both at your next meeting, to have this conversation with them.
Yeah, we need to have ask some really hard questions here. I have to say that I think this, if I'm not correct, I know you had mentioned that this is the second year of the ECS funding reduction. Is it the second or the third year? Because I remember a while ago, it wasn't just last year, but the year before that, where they reduced some of the ECS funding, and we knew it was going to be happening, and they want to take it out completely by 2025, I believe, or 2028. They want to reduce the ECS all the way completely.
I don't know if they're going to reduce all of it, but I do know that they're going to reduce it out to, I think, 2025. I don't know how many years it's been. My memory only goes back 2 years. So.
And I would, Mr. Mayor, I would like for us to, for the town, us councilors, to write a letter to our legislators and stating that they should reconsider South Windsor's contribution for the sheer fact that we are the #1 growing school district in the state. And we have an anomaly going on here. And when they did their formula in 2017, that wasn't taken into consideration. And I would love to have a letter written from the council stating to our representatives to reevaluate South Windsor. Suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor Pendleton. I think that makes sense to do that.
To kind of follow that
yeah,
thought process, I mean, how interested is the council in wanting to lobby the state to see if we can get some of those funds reinstated? Because I mean, I think it's pretty aggressive to want to cut $500,000, and especially when they're giving more money. I mean, some of the towns that I mentioned are getting over $1 million to $1.5 million extra this year.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Maniscalco. I'm going to go to
nods.
yeah. I'm going to go to Councilor Kabowski, and then we'll come right back to that lobbying idea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, Mr. Maniscalco, that's a good idea, because as I looked through the list, there was one city that jumped out, and as I calculated it, they're receiving 29.7% of the overall increase. That's pretty significant, and I don't know what their overall education budget is. I am going to go and see if I could find that somewhere, because I've got to wonder how much of their overall education budget are we paying as state residents versus the town residents are paying. But I would agree. I think it would, I'd like to see us all reach out to our legislators and Senator Anwar and say, this needs to be reconsidered, because looking at that list, some of the increases I saw on there just made no sense whatsoever. Like you said, Mr. Maniscalco, Greenwich, Fairfield, the increases make no sense to me whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Kabowski. Councilor Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, being that we might take the capital projects into consideration, should we try to come up with a timeline for voting as to what the projects are going to be selected, so that they're ready in the event that we go with the with the suggestion that some of them are going to be covered by the other funds?
Yes, Councilor Lopez, thank you. I think you're right. I think at either that May 3rd or May 10th meeting, we need to come up with the list of, all right, here are the programs, or here's the project we're going to move from this category to that category, and have that set before we go on to voting on May 10th. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. I just want to point out one thing. 169 towns in the state of Connecticut. And I know we think that a lot of people are having this discussion tonight, but 101 towns are receiving plus allocations. So 101 out of 169 are not worrying about this tonight. So it's not like it's a small number. There are a lot of towns who are receiving more money than they did last year. So keep that in mind as we have this discussion. All right, any other comments? Councilor Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So timing is going to be very critical here. If we have a clear, if our administrators on the towns that have a clear understanding, and I understand stuff from the feds is very vague, but if we can get some kind of a clear understanding, and the Capital Projects Committee has a quick meeting, Mr. Roberts has all of that knowledge on the capital projects end with the several of us that also serve. So the council, I mean, I think that the heavy lifting really does have to come from the Capital Projects Committee to take a look at any of these projects that may qualify. So I guess on the timing, on the spectrum of where we are in timing, you know, if we have a meeting on May 10th and there's more information coming out on May 11th, you know, I wonder if the Capital Projects Committee should get together and with the knowledge that Pat Perry has and Mr. Maniscalco and Mr. Roberts, and see if there's any of those projects we can at least target for, because all those projects are ready to go. They wouldn't be on there if they weren't ready to go. So, you know, for next year. So moving some of those technology projects a little earlier that fit into that criteria, I just think that heavy lifting really should be done by the Capital Projects Committee with the recommendation to the council. So I don't know, Mr. Roberts, if I can, Mr. Maniscalco, if you don't mind, I was going to see if Mr. Roberts has any comments on, and Patty, how do you feel about pulling together the Capital Projects Committee and looking at any of those that might fit that criteria? And Mr. Maniscalco, you as well. Thank you.
No, I think that's a great idea to get a recommendation together.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Roberts, will you and I and Councilor Snyder kind of put our heads together and find a date? Let's call a special meeting.
Sounds good. We'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Hockenberry.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, going on the tail end of what Councilor Snyder had said, this might be a question for Mike or Patty Perry's. The money that is expected from the federal government, is there a date, and do we get it all in one lump sum or in, I think it's 3 or 4 payments. I forget when that is. Because
I don't remember there-
depend on the projects that you choose to take off of capital projects.
Yeah, I know there is a date for it to be allocated. I don't remember the exact date. Do you remember, Patty, when they were saying it was like 60 to 90 days from the time it passed? They were supposed to get funds.
Right, I think we're supposed to have funds, by June 11th, and it's gonna come in 2 installments.
Okay, I was just thinking of if we're gonna take something off of the capital projects list to consider that timing for the projects that are being taken off. And I know it has to do with what's covered or not off of that list, off of the American Care. So that's all I was thinking when you were talking about taking things off of capital projects.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Hockenberry. Deputy Mayor Pendleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's another thing that bothers me with this whole funding of ECS funding. As you stated, Mr. Maniscalco, the state pays the charter school directly. It doesn't come to us. They take that chunk out, correct? Well, the problem that I have with that is if a child leaves the charter school and comes back to public school, the money doesn't follow the child. The town never gets that money back for the child. It's paid for the year, I guess, for the amount of students. I'm not quite sure how that works. I don't know if it's per student. I don't know, I don't know what that formula is. How do they determine what to give to the charter school? And then the charter school keeps that money, even though the student may not be there. Does that make any sense? Am I making sense?
You're making
I
sense,
understand.
Mayor. The formula doesn't make sense, but you're making sense.
Why, common sense would say to me, why doesn't that money come back to our public school system to follow that child back? I don't know if $493,000 is that the total that's going to the charter school. That's based off of how many students from our community. And if that child comes back to us, why aren't we getting any of that money back? I don't know.
All right, Mr. Maniscalco, do you have an answer to that?
I don't. Sorry.
All right, okay. Councilor, thank you, Deputy Mayor Pendleton. Councilor Manili.
Yeah, they're magnet schools, not charter schools, Miss Pendleton, but it's the attendance on October 1st. Who's ever in the building on October 1st, that's where they get the base number from. It doesn't matter if all those students leave the magnet school and come back to South Windsor Public Schools. It doesn't matter. It's who is in that building on October 1st. And that was an arbitrary date that's been statewide for quite a while.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Manili. All right, any other comments, questions? So we're going to look at inviting, I'm going to recap a little bit, inviting the superintendent, the board chair to our May 3rd meeting, have this similar discussion about ECS funding, and then keep that special meeting for May 10th, where hopefully we will be able to evaluate the capital projects and the American Rescue Plan money, and hopefully be ready to vote by May 10th. Councilor Manili.
And maybe Mr. Merca also on their
Yes,
business.
sure. Yes, definitely.
You want to
Okay,
invite her too?
you're right.
Mr. Mayor, the lobbying for the cry for South Windsor and funding South Windsor?
Yes. So do we want to do one letter from all of us? How do we want to do this? Or each individual letter, if we get the boilerplate together and send copies out, and then people can add their own comments, but individual letters, what do you think is best? Yes, Councilor Evans?
I'm just curious if they have a public hearing for this item at the state. Are we able to speak to that as well, or how would that work? Do they hold a public hearing for this particular?
I don't think they do typically for the budget.
Just the overall budget, not this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I was thinking that might be an effective way to
right.
express.
Okay, Councilor Snyder? Thank you, Councilor Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would rather not send something from the whole council,
Okay,
only because I don't know how much impact that has.
Yeah.
But if we have some talking points or,
right.
I think it's much more effective to get letters from 9 people than it is from
That's-
one body that, I don't know that they even pay attention to that.
That's-
I don't know how much impact that has. as opposed to if we had a basic starting thing and then we add our own thoughts and our own words.
Right, right.
So I'm all for having all of us do it separately, but would appreciate any assistance in the composition of that. Thank you.
Okay. Can I thank you, Councilor Snyder. Can we get some consensus that I thought I saw some heads nodding before? You think the individual letters are better?
And
Okay.
we can offer up our town manager to read the letters, you know?
Right. Okay.
I have perfected that skill over the last year. So.
Okay, so Mr. Maniscalco, if you wouldn't mind maybe doing kind of a boilerplate draft and then sending that out, and then each individual can add their comments as Councilor Snyder suggested.
Okay.
To come up with some, this way they're different letters and I know exactly what you're saying there. Okay. Any other comments or questions about that? All right, our next item is the general government budget discussion. I think we've kind of done a little bit of that too, but if anyone else has anything specifically on our general government budget.
Mr. Mayor, I do have one other item I'd like to discuss with the council under that section. So myself and Mrs. Perry have been trying to keep tabs on places where the council have identified there could potentially be cuts. So just to run through those with everybody, it looked like there could be a $500 deduction from the juvenile fire starters line item, $867 reduction for the police department car washes, a $57,487 reduction for the police car, including all its accessories, and then a $30,000 reduction to the Wapping building costs. I believe that comes to $88,854, which would get you, without the ECS, if we ignore the ECS stuff right now, it gets us to a mill rate of 37.85, which is a 0.08% decrease.
All right, and Mr. Maniscalco, just one clarification. The Wapping building cuts really is a decrease in the rental for that space? Is that what we?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
so if you remember from our last meeting, we budgeted about
Right.
225,000. Looking
Right.
back at the last 5 years of expenditures, on average, the largest amount is about 190,000 that we're paying. So I believe, you know, we could safely
Okay.
cut about 30,000 out of that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Councilor Snyder.
Thank you. Yeah, while we're talking about this general government budget, I was wondering how councilors felt if we're able to remove some projects that fit into this federal relief bill from capital projects. Would we? And I guess I'm just looking for input from everybody before the capital projects committee meets, hopefully this week or next week. What's the thought of, would you want us to move some of those other projects up in there? I don't think we want to, I don't know, or do we want to reduce the budget to even reduce that amount? So I'll give you, for instance, so let's, and these are just, you know, round examples. So let's say we can take IT projects out of there. And without having it right in front of me, let's say it's $400,000 if we take a look at all the IT projects. Scott, don't worry, it probably isn't, but I'm using a round number. Okay, so if we could take $400,000 out of the capital projects budget, because those projects will be paid for by this federal money, do councilors feel we want to move some of the other capital projects up in the queue and still spend that amount of money? Or do we think we want to do a reduction? But a reduction in the budget of that amount that we're able to do with the federal money? Or do we think, or the other side of that is, I'm afraid that if we do decrease the capital project budget, will we be able to get that same amount of money next year? does everybody, am I making any sense? So if we
Yes.
take out 400,000 from capital project, because the federal money will cover those things to pay for it, and especially if we have like 7 million coming in, we should be able to hit some of those other things that, infrastructure and things like that. I mean, that fit into that criteria. Do we want to move projects up, or do we want to save that money? And I say save, but I'm afraid it's going to kick us in the what when we go into budgeting for next year. And then I don't want to decrease capital projects. That's what's scaring me behind this. I'm just kind of talking out loud and just thinking
Right.
out loud rather, to see what people generally think. Yeah,
Thank-
Andy,
thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor, do you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I have worked along with you and others who have tried to, over the last 8 years, tried to keep that capital project budget up. So I'd hate to see us go backwards. So I would be concerned
Unless
about
it
that too.
doesn't go backwards and we still
No.
fund the same amount
Right.
of money next year,
Right,
right?
that's
But
what
we cut back on those projects that we can pay for
Right.
because they're non-reoccurring.
right.
Mr.
exactly.
Maniscalco, are you hearing what I'm saying too?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Councilor Evans, thank you,
So
Councilor
just-
Snyder. Councilor Evans had a comment. Yes. Councilor Snyder, one more thought? Go ahead. All right, Councilor Evans.
So making perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
But so I just wanted to say that something that I have kind of had conversations about a little bit, and I know I wasn't at the last meeting where we talked about capital projects. But one thought I had, because we do have those infrastructure pieces that we are going to have to start working on, pieces with the town hall that we didn't fund through referendum, is that if we are able to move some of these projects off of our budget and our capital projects, perhaps we look at creating a facility sinking fund, and some of that money goes into that kind of account or line item, so that we're starting to build and save for the infrastructure and the facilities that we need to maintain and improve. So maybe we don't necessarily, if we take out 400,000, maybe we don't put back in 400,000, but maybe we put 80,000 into and create a line item for a sinking fund to start preparing for these projects that we're going to need to do for infrastructure in our town.
Okay, thank you. Good point. I think you and Councilor Snyder are on the same wavelength there. Okay. Deputy Mayor Pendleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Reducing capital, let's start with Councilor Snyder's comments, and if I think I understand them correctly. Removing projects from capital and funding them with the federal dollars that we're allowed to do could possibly reduce the budget this year. And you mentioned you're worried about and or moving items up. I prefer not to move items up. However, next year, because this is what I talked about, funding capital is funded 1% of the current budget. So next year's capital will be funded with 1% of next year's budget, whatever we go into, and 5% of the new revenue that comes in. That's the formula for funding capital. So capital will be funded next year. If we cut $400,000 out this year, it will still be funded. Capital, it's our overall budget. That's how capital is funded. Even though we're reducing 400,000 out of a project, the current budget that we're in, or that's what you would be looking at for next year's budget. Removing that $400,000, let's just say, because I'm using your example hypothetically, for the infrastructure, or I mean for the IT stuff. Removing the $400,000 to help balance the general government budget is removing it from capital but putting it into the general government budget. That's still going to keep our budget where we're at, I do believe. No, it will reduce
we're getting
our
money
budget
in.
by 400,000.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's kind of like, oh, the Peter to pay Paul kind of thing. It's just kind of crazy. I know it's,
Right.
yeah. So, and I know next year it will be funded, and it's funded the 1%, but it's also funded with 5% of the new revenue. What is the actual funding that went, or that is being looked at presently for capital funding? What is that grand total? Since it's 1% of the current budget we're in, and 5% of
But it's
revenue.
not, Mike, Oh, Mr. Mayor, Mike,
Yes.
it's not 1% of our budget.
It is. That's how it's funded.
No, it's not 1% of the budget.
No.
It's supposed to increase by 1% of the grand list growth on an annual basis.
1 to
if I remember.
5% of the grand list growth on any given year.
Yeah, so your
So
total
it's not
grand
that.
list, or your total budget from the general fund for capital is $2.1 million. And I believe there's an additional $500,000 that we're also adding to that from capital non-reoccurring. So your total capital improvement plan is 2.6 million,
2.6 million.
72.
All right,
Which is
thank
an
you.
increase of $71,000 this year from last year.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna go to Counselor Manili, and then we've got 2 minutes before the public hearing. No? Okay. Thank you. Counselor Hockenberry, 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Alls I was gonna run on was, kind of what Liz was thinking about is, do you know an approximate amount of our new revenue coming in for the coming year? Because that might help us with the answer for capital projects and funding it. And that would be for Mike or Patty Perry.
Now, that's gonna be based on our economic growth during the upcoming year, so you can't predict that at this point.
Yeah.
I know we can't predict it, but don't we have projects coming in?
So I mean, this last year we saw 3.4%
Yeah.
grand list growth. You know, I would say maybe we'll see about the same next year. We've got, you know, a pretty significant amount of construction going on right now. That being said, who knows what could happen? I mean, tomorrow, the pandemic could impact the cost of construction to the point that all those construction projects get put on hold.
And I know you don't want to budget on a guess, so it was just, I was
Yeah.
just wondering, because we have so many projects going on, I was wondering if we were like looking at an estimate. So it was just,
Yeah, it's
I know
so
we
hard
can't
to-
budget on a guess, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Counselor Hockenberry. Ms. Reed, we're going to start the public hearing in 2 minutes. Mr. Roberts, are you all set?
I am, Mr. Mayor.
All right. If you don't mind, then we'll go, Ms. Reed, if you can read the public notice.
I think we have to wait till 8. It's 1 more minute.
Oh, okay, 1 more minute, sorry. Who's got a minute to have a discussion point? Or who can do it in a minute, let's put it that way. All right. Any other comments then about the general budget, not necessarily this topic with capital projects, but general government budget discussion and cuts? Councilor Evans? Councilor Evans.
I'll take the minute challenge.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify to my point about if we were to able to move things off capital projects and to then look at funding, to adding funding into capital projects, I still think we should aim for that 0% or lower increase, but keep in mind, you know, what that balance is, what we're able to fund in a different way versus
Right.
what we're able to bring forward, you know, to create possibly that sinking fund. And I'm going to end because it's 8 o'clock.
Right, okay, thank you, good point, thank you. Councilor Evans. All right, we're at 8 o'clock. Ms. Reed, can you read the public notice?
Yep. Notice is hereby given that the South Windsor Town Council has set Monday, April 26th, 2021 at 8 p.m. as the time for a virtual public hearing to receive citizen input on the proposed general government budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. The public is welcome to email comments to townCouncilComments@southwindsor-ct.gov, dated at South Windsor, Connecticut, the 16th day of April 2021, attested to by Deborah W. Reed, Clerk of the Council.
All right, thank you, Ms. Reed. So we will open the public hearing for comments on the general government budget. Mr. Maniscalco, do we have any emails to read?
I do not have any emails.
All right. Mr. Roberts, any phone calls?
Mr. Mayor, I have no one on the line.
All right, thank you. I think we'll close the public hearing and move on to our next item on the agenda. And if Deputy Mayor Pendleton will be recognized for executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 6A, move into executive session for personnel issues, town manager and the clerk of the council's evaluations. And we are not inviting anyone in, it's just the council that is meeting.
All right, is there a second? Second, Council Manili. All those in favor, moving to executive session, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right, I will just remind anyone viewing the meeting that we will not be returning to this public meeting. We will adjourn right in our executive session. So thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Maniscalco.
Right.
All right, Mr. Roberts, we can stay on the line, right?
You can't.